The British government has been in Ottawa for 86 years. London still exists. The British people still exist. The monarchy still exists. Britain losing the Battle of Britain is not the end of Britain. It is the beginning of something far stranger, a war that lasts for more years than it did in our timeline, kills twice as many people, and ends with a world that looks nothing like what either side was fighting for. This is the timeline where Göring doesn't make his mistake. Where the RAF runs out of pilots before it runs out of will. Where the barges cross. It doesn't go the way Hitler planned. By September 1, 1940, RAF Fighter Command was losing the Battle of Britain. This is not hindsight. Keith Park, the commander of 11 Group, wrote in his diary that week that his bases were barely operational. The Luftwaffe had adopted a strategy of systematic airfield destruction, hitting the same fields every day, targeting the radar stations, destroying the ground crews and mechanics without whom no aircraft could fly. Aircraft could be replaced. Trained pilots and technicians could not. In our timeline, on September 7, 1940, Hermann Göring made the decision that saved Britain. He shifted the Luftwaffe's target from RAF airfields to London. He did it partly because the RAF had bombed Berlin and Hitler demanded retaliation, partly because Göring believed the airfield campaign was already won and civilian bombing would break British morale faster. He was wrong on both counts. The airfields weren't won, they were 10 days from breaking. And British morale didn't break. It hardened. In this timeline, UDIT wins the argument. The photographs are too convincing. The airfield campaign continues. By September 17, RAF Fighter Command has no operational bases south of a line from Bristol to Norwich. The radar chain is dark. The Luftwaffe controls the air over the English Channel. On the morning of September 21, 1940, the first German barges leave Calais. The crossing is not a clean triumph. It is a catastrophe for both sides. The Royal Navy is still operational. Without air cover, British destroyers charge into the invasion fleet and inflict enormous losses. Perhaps 30% of the first wave's transport capacity is sunk in the Channel. German soldiers drown in their barges. The sea runs with diesel fuel and wreckage. But enough make it across. By noon on September 21, 4 German divisions are ashore between Folkestone and Eastbourne. They have a beachhead. And without air cover, the British ground forces defending the coast, already depleted by Dunkirk, cannot dislodge them. The decision Churchill makes in the next 48 hours is the most consequential of the war. He does not fight to the last man in London. He does not allow the government to be captured or destroyed. He orders the evacuation of the government and the monarchy to Canada. The king refuses to go. George VI's exact words, according to 3 separate accounts, the king does not abandon his people. Churchill overrules him. Not gently. He tells the king directly that a captured British monarch is a propaganda weapon that will end the war and cost more lives than any battle. The king goes. He does not forgive Churchill for it for 2 years. On September 26, 1940, the British government reconvenes in Ottawa. The war continues. Germany occupies southern England by November 1940. London falls without a street-by-street battle. Churchill's order was explicit: no Stalingrad. Preserve civilian lives. The resistance will be long. It cannot begin with a massacre. The occupation administration is headed by a German military governor with explicit orders to maintain order with minimal brutality. Hitler wants a functional, productive occupied Britain. He has seen that terror in Poland creates partisans faster than it creates compliance. He wants the factories running and the ports operational. What Hitler does not understand, what no occupier of Britain has ever successfully understood, is that British compliance and British defeat are not the same thing. The government in Ottawa broadcasts to Britain every day. The BBC continues from Scotland. The resistance network that MI6 and SOE had been building since 1938 activates. Arms caches appear in village halls and church crypts. Former RAF pilots become organizers. The country occupied south of Birmingham is under German military law. The country north of Birmingham is still fighting. The line stabilizes. Germany cannot push north, their supply lines are already at their limit and the USSR sits on their eastern flank like a held breath. Britain cannot push south without the United States. Both sides dig in along the Midlands. The occupation lasts for years. Forced labor, reprisal shootings, systematic food extraction, it kills more British civilians than the Blitz killed in our timeline. But it does not break the country. It fuses it into something harder and more unified than it has been since 1066. The Britain that emerges from occupation in 1944 is less class-conscious, less deferential, and carrying a specific, operational anger at Germany that shapes its politics for the next 50 years. In our timeline, the fall of France brought the US closer to intervention. In this timeline, the fall of Britain south makes it inevitable, not because American sentiment shifts overnight, but because the strategic argument becomes unanswerable. A Germany that controls the English Channel is a Germany with a potential Atlantic base. That changes the calculation for every naval planner in Washington. The United States enters the war in December 1941, same as our timeline. Pearl Harbor happens regardless of what occurs in Europe. Japan's decision to attack the US is driven by its own imperial logic in the Pacific, not by European events. The timeline diverges sharply here. D-Day in our world was June 1944. The invasion was launched from English ports across a narrow stretch of channel at Normandy. In this world, the Allied invasion of Europe does not happen until June 1946. It launches from two directions simultaneously, from Scotland and Northern Ireland across the North Sea to Norway, and from North Africa across the Mediterranean into southern France. It requires 2 more years of build-up because there is no English base. It is more ambitious, more complex, and more costly than the D-Day of our world. The war in Europe ends in March 1947. 9 months later than our timeline. The additional 9 months cost approximately 4 million lives, mostly Soviet, mostly in the grinding Eastern Front that went on longer because Germany could extract resources from Britain to sustain it. The Holocaust proceeds and concludes on roughly the same timeline as our history, because its machinery was separate from the military campaign. This is the darkest fact in this timeline, and it needs to be said plainly: the different course of the war in the West does not save the Jews of Europe. The difference is in the European state system that emerges after, not in what happens to those who were murdered before. The world in 2026 in this timeline is recognizably similar to ours in its broad outlines but wrong in almost every specific. The Cold War still happens. The Soviet Union still eventually collapses. The European Union still forms. The United States is still the dominant global power. These structures were driven by forces deeper than the Battle of Britain outcome. What is different is the weight of the recent past on every institution. Britain kept its Ottawa government for 12 years after liberation. The stated reason was reconstruction. The real reason was that Churchill, and then Attlee, and then the civil service, had discovered something uncomfortable: governing from Ottawa worked. The distance from the bomb damage, from the social trauma, from the still raw divisions between occupied South and free North, it was easier to make rational policy from across the ocean. When the government finally moved fully back to London in 1958, it left behind a permanent British Commonwealth administration in Ottawa that never fully dissolved. Canada and Britain are closer in this timeline than in ours, not as empire and colony, but as two countries that shared the worst years and can't quite figure out how to be separate afterward. The occupation left a scar that healed but didn't disappear. Southern English identity in this world carries something that doesn't exist in ours, the specific psychological texture of having been occupied, of having collaborated or resisted or simply survived under foreign military government. It is not the same as French collaboration, because the British occupation was shorter and the resistance was more organized. But it is not nothing either. The political consequence is a British left that is more radical than ours, shaped by wartime privation and the shared experience of occupation, and a British right that is more nationalist and specifically anti-German in ways that made European integration harder and later. Britain joins the European Union equivalent in this timeline in 1979, not 1973. And the argument about whether to join is, as it was in our world but more so, really an argument about whether you can share a project with the country that occupied your capital. The nuclear question is the same. The atomic bomb is developed on the same schedule. The Manhattan Project ran in Canada and the US, outside occupied territory, and was not affected by the Battle of Britain outcome. Hiroshima still happens. The Pacific War ends in August 1945, same timeline. Japan's surrender is identical because it was driven by the bomb and Soviet entry into the Pacific, both of which occur regardless of what happened in Britain. The most interesting divergence in 2026 is cultural rather than political. Britain in our world has a particular relationship to the Second World War, pride, nostalgia, the sense of a finest hour that was ultimately triumphant without occupation. The Blitz spirit. Churchill as unambiguous hero. The war as the thing that made Britain what it is. In this world, the war made Britain something different. The finest hour exists, it is the evacuation to Ottawa, the resistance, the 6 years of holding the line from Scotland, the liberation. But it is not a clean triumph. It is mixed with the memory of surrender, of collaboration, of a government that left and had to be convinced to come back. The Churchill mythology does not quite exist in the same form. He is honored, but he is also the man who put the king on a boat and left London to be occupied. That cuts differently. Britain in this world is less certain of itself. Less inclined to imperial nostalgia because the imperial experience has a different shape, not we held the empire through the war, but we ran the empire from Ottawa and then had to negotiate its dissolution from a position of visible weakness. Independence movements in India and elsewhere accelerate after 1947 because British authority has been visibly shaken in a way it was not in our timeline. And yet, the British people did not break. They resisted for 6 years under occupation and then fought their way home. The liberation of London in 1946 is taught in every British school not as victory but as return, something subtler and, in its way, more profound. One argument. One set of reconnaissance photographs. One general who reads them differently. Göring's decision to shift from airfields to cities in our timeline was not inevitable. The historians who call it his greatest blunder are correct, but blunders require alternatives. The alternative existed. It was nearly taken. The margin between the two Britons is not the courage of the RAF, which was the same in both. It is a bureaucratic argument in a German headquarters building on a September afternoon. What this timeline reveals is something about the nature of national survival that our comfortable version of the story obscures. We tell the Battle of Britain as a story of victory, outnumbered pilots, the few, the finest hour. It was all of those things. But it was also extremely close to being something else entirely. The courage was always there. The outcome was contingent. Britain survived the occupation in this timeline not because it was unbeatable, but because its government made one right decision in the middle of catastrophe. It preserved the institution rather than the territory. It took the king to safety. It kept broadcasting. It chose to fight from Ottawa because Ottawa was the only place left to fight from. Is a nation defined by its geography or by its continuity? Churchill's answer, "Put the king on a boat," suggests he knew the answer. The territory can be reclaimed. The institution, once broken, cannot be rebuilt. Would you trade our Britain, with its uninterrupted sovereignty, its particular form of island pride, its uncomplicated relationship to its own wartime mythology, for the one that lost, survived, and came home? I'm genuinely not sure which one I'd rather live in. Until the vault opens again, subscribe to the Alternate Archive.